I think of it as political art, as social realism is. I wanted to affect people's, mentality of how politics work, dealing with, border violence, immigration. And I want to take the paintings and make them more than the sound bites that we get used to.
We're in the studio of Rigoberto Gonzalez here in Harlingen, Texas. Thanks for having us here today. We're glad to be here with you. You've been a painter of the border for your entire career. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came to be a painter and why you came to be a painter?
I remember, growing up in Mexico. Originally, I was born in Reynosa, Mexico. The tortilla factories would hand out calendars. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they would have reproductions of, saints, or, maybe a reproduction of, The Last Judgment by Michelangelo with the calendar. And I remember staring at those calendars and just really being, in a state of awe and inspiration as a child. I think that was really instrumental in inspiring me to be a painter. Another very, very big influence was my brother. He was incredibly gifted as a draftsman, and seeing him from being younger than him and seeing how he would draw so easily really inspired me to start drawing. I remember passing off some of his drawings as my own drawings and saying, this is what I did, and people being impressed, and I really enjoyed getting that attention. But deep down I knew that I was lying, that I didn't draw this. But that really inspired me to, perfect my ability at drawing, and so I think those two influences were instrumental. And also, I see my mother, take care of my nieces and nephews, and I see her sit down with them on her lap, and to entertain them, she'll draw for them. She has good drawing ability. So I think she must have done the same with me when I was a baby. Or a toddler. She must have sat down with me on her lap and drawn for me to.
It's just always been there.
Yeah, so.
Whether it was your mother, or literally at your mother's knee, or sort of emulating the accolades available to your big brother for having a skill and a talent. And I notice we came into your studio today, there's a wall that you have up with all these wonderful images from art history, particularly Baroque images. And we can see this rich, wonderful imagery that is inspirational, and you can borrow from the compositions of these things, borrow from the lighting of these things, and that you use these as reference. And the importance of art history to informing your art. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? I don't know that your art could be what it is without art history.
Well, I think it's a personal aesthetic. I've always enjoyed just looking at the way things are, as opposed to the way they should be, and trying to capture the way things are. For example, this painting, which reflects the border, not specifically this border, but an experience of the border, and also talking to the people of the border. And everybody has very dramatic stories. There's all these incredible narratives from just talking to ordinary people. And the paintings, the Baroque paintings, those were narratives. Those, paintings telling a story. And that I always found really attractive, just being able to look at a painting and in a way that that you read a book, it's telling you a story. I always thought that is really the challenge, or the greatest challenge that an artist can have, trying to capture a story. Those artists from the past, they were, telling biblical stories and stories of mythology, but I wanted to capture, the everyday experience of the border. The painting here was told to me by a woman that had smuggled people from Ciudad Juarez into El Paso when she was a teenager, and that image, that it created an incredible mental image, for me. This teenage girl, risking her life and making a living, helping her father, smuggle people. So I want to tell those, stories, tell those narratives with the influence of art history.
We live on a frontier, And there is no shortage of drama in everyday reality on this frontier. And one of the things I think your work also points to is there's sort of multiple sections of this frontier as you move up and down it. You were commenting on this particular painting being from up near Ciudad Juarez, and that there was a different character to the culture and to the people, even ethnically, in that region. So it's not all one thing coming across one border, but it's sort of multiple frontiers with multiple sort of mestizaje frontiers with multiple mixes coming across. Why don't you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, for example, this, if you look at their faces, you can tell the different, mixing of influences. The Spanish, the Apache you had, other ethnic groups living in El Paso and Juarez, and you see that reflected in the faces of the models. You mentioned the frontier and the drama of the frontier first.
Yeah.
And that drama is created because of a sense of survival. Mm-hmm. There's that drama of just barely trying to stay alive, and that it's like in this painting. It is the people risking their life to better their lives. It's not not a painting of some stock trader just trying to enrich himself. This is somebody just trying to feed themselves and trying to see another sunset or another sunrise.
It seems that you take these stories of everyday drama and you treat them as if they're mythic narratives with the same respect, the same drama and lighting and techniques. So you paint these people with the same dignity as if they were Greek heroes or biblical figures and saints, and has a sort of elevating quality to what might otherwise be disregarded as more mundane. And so there's an ennobling intrinsic to your process.
The way that I achieve that is by borrowing, from art history, borrowing certain compositional elements, the scale of the figures. And then I increase that scale and that monumentality by, reducing the size of the landscape. You've got in this, you've got the mountains and the sunset, but it all pales in comparison to the size of the models.
Right.
And it's a device that comes from when Velázquez would do the portrait of the King of Spain. They would make the horizon at the knees of the king, or when Rubens would paint the King of Spain, or Rigaud when the French painter, when he would do Louis XIV. You had these vast landscapes of the the properties and the wealth owned by the kings, and you had this horizon line really down by the knees of the king, and that way making them even more monumental.
That monumentality provides a certain hieratic scale.
Yeah, and that's what I am taking that compositional device, you could say, and applying it to the everyday stories of of the people around us.
Well, you borrow liberally from art history, and you have this wonderful pietà in the midst of your piece. And a Baroque painting was very much about creating a sense of empathy with the emotion of the subject.
Yes.
And your work really has that capacity. We can hear that 50,000 people have been killed in a year along a border or whatnot, and those numbers don't have a lot of meaning. But one suffering mother holding her dying son in a pietà dishumanizes and makes it, like you said, a universal experience. Is infinitely more powerful. People must ask you, when you paint these very traumatic images, I mean, you have to go live in a headspace for months at a time, where you're painting decapitation and you're painting torture and you're painting really difficult, sort of apocalyptic imagery. What's that like?
I have a certain disposition, artistically, and people criticize me, like, why are you painting this negative side of the border culture? Mm-hmm. I think just to warn people, like, or not to kind of simplify or exaggerate what's happening in the borders, is that I can only paint what interests me about the border, So when I talk about the violence, I don't want people to think that my vision is the only vision of the border. You know, you've met other artists
Right.
working along the border. You've talked to them. Their work is entirely different from what I do. I'm just giving you something that interests me deeply, you know, in addressing with my work.
As you start to think about border imagery you could paint in the future, as we have issues like this one with the crossing, and we see the pathos of the courage of the people coming across. We see the suffering in the series that you've done on the violence of the cartels. If you're would come up with another body of work that, over the next few years, what kind of thoughts do you have about sort of the point of view you will? Because you're an ambitious fellow. You're not one to just repeat yourself. And when you put this much into a painting, and just for the record, we were talking, it takes months to paint one of these canvases. And years if you put the conceptual process and the drawing processes and everything to evolve them. What do you think you have on the horizon for your sort of next take on the border?
The trade of firearms. That's one. That's another set of paintings that I could do. Weapons. I'm really interested in seeing how I could do beautiful paintings of terrible weapons. If you look at over to my right side, I have a still life I'm working on of a wolf skull, and it's surrounded by 50 caliber bullets. And I'm making the connection of, you know, the way that the bullets are placed, and the way that, you know, making a connection with the fangs of the wolf. We've done away with the natural predator from the border, but we found this.
We found other predators to replace them.
So as I was working on that painting, it gave me ideas to maybe start doing paintings of weapons. I still haven't quite figured that out.
I think your paintings are sort of an incitement to virtue through horror of vice that brings that classical awareness to remind us of history and the lessons of that history and the degree to which we are repeating its mistakes in the present. Rigoberto, thank you for your wonderful works. Thank you for hosting us in your studio, and I hope you keep painting these pieces of amazing consciousness. Thank you.
For centuries, the Rio Grande Valley has been a place of cultural confluence, a place where the harsh surrounding landscape sculpted a resiliency in its inhabitants, regardless of their place of cultural origin. The valley has been the land of the mestizo, and that mestizaje experience has permeated the very fabric of life on both sides of the river. The mestizo worldview has remained undeniably predominant in the region.
Defining Art is a production of KMBH-TV. Support for Defining Art is provided by RGV and Beyond Magazine and viewers like you.